Good afternoon, everybody, and very welcome to this seminar. My name is Oscar Jonsson, and I am the Academic Director of the Center for the Governance of Change. For those of you who don't know who we are, I will just mention that we are an applied research institution focusing on emerging technologies and their social, political, and economic consequences. We're super happy to have you here today to join us for the launch of our research project on sustainability, innovation, and the future of healthcare. These are sad circumstances to talk about healthcare, but at the same time, it's never been a better opportunity, both in terms of the pandemic, but also in the transformation that healthcare is going through right now. Today's launch is the culmination of a 1.5-year research project that has included 11 researchers, 4 advisory board members who have produced 6 research papers and 4 case studies, all of which that are online now. And the key findings and results are synthesized in an executive report, which you all find on our webpage. The idea of this project to investigate and understand how artificial intelligence, big data, and IoT is impacting healthcare came about around 2017. And when we started looking for partners, we got in contact with Lilly, who directly provided a lot of interest, and we felt a great vibe. So from the beginning, Lilly went in as a supporter, who has been very enthusiastic about this project and has supported us, but also at the same time, very much respected the independence of the researchers. So without further ado, I would welcome all of you, and I will hand the floor over to the president of Lilly Spain, Portugal, and Greece, and also the Lilly Foundation, Nabil Daoud. And thank you very much at the same time for a great cooperation. So please, now the floor is yours.
Very good, Oscar. Thanks so much, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I would like first to express my gratitude to Instituto de Empresa for their partnership and leadership in conducting such a relevant study on artificial intelligence and healthcare in Europe. Special thanks, obviously, to all the researchers, the advisory team, as well as the panelists who are joining us today to be able to debate on all these matters. For Lilly, it's simply been a privilege to be able to support such an initiative. It is driven by our conviction that technological innovation, including artificial intelligence, together with great pharmaceutical innovation, will be key to shape the future of healthcare and basically allow our societies to meet all the challenging demands that we will face in the future with an aging population, increase in chronic diseases, and soaring costs. I would like to share 2 brief examples from Lilly on how the marriage of technological innovation together with pharmaceutical innovation has already proven to be quite transformational. The first one, quite relevant to today's pandemic, is basically related to a case where in February 2020, a UK-based AI platform called Benevolent published in The Lancet an article indicating that one of Lilly medicines, which is currently prescribed across Europe for treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, might prove efficacious for treatment of COVID-19 acute respiratory disease, basically by limiting the viral entry and stopping the inflammatory process on patients. In matters of weeks, we have taken that hypothesis and tested it first in our labs in preclinical settings. It has proven to be conclusive. And in a matter of another few weeks, we've initiated 2 large phase 3 clinical trials in large cohorts of patients in a randomized fashion, one of which in collaboration with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease in the US, to basically confirm whether this product might end up being efficacious and safe for the treatment of COVID. We should get the results of these studies shortly. And if this is proving successful, it would be a magnificent example of how artificial intelligence has basically helped identify a target medicine which could prove efficacious for a major health crisis and shorten tremendously the time of development to basically potentially bring in evidence on a possible medicine in a matter of months compared to years of trial and error, which is the way the process would have taken in the past. Another short example shortly is more related to the application of artificial intelligence algorithm in treating health data, multitude of health data in real world, basically health data captured from connected devices. Diabetes is proving to be a great example of this, where today many diabetes patients already are able to capture the level of glucose in their blood in a continuous manner. They also can know their level of activities through their connected watch. And recently, they're also able to get the amount of insulin and the time at which they've injected it through their connected pen. When all this information is compiled together and analyzed, it's providing to be a wealth of data, helping patients better manage their disease, and healthcare professionals also provide better outcomes. So two short examples I wanted to share to show that the future is already here today, and hopefully explain why we are so excited and proud to be able to be associated with this initiative, hoping that it will be the beginning of great reflections and lots of discussions around it. Back to you, Oscar. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for those kind words, Nabil. The seminar will proceed as following. We will first have our product director, Mireia Crispin, outline the key findings and highlights of the seminar. And thereafter, we'll continue over to a panel discussion with an impressive panel, which includes a mix of public policy, public health professionals, practitioners, and successful entrepreneurs, which will be led by Dr. Gallego, who is the research coordinator for the project. But first of all, over to you, Mireia, and thanks again for really putting this impressive project together. And the floor is yours, and show us what you find, please.
Thank you very much, Oscar. First of all, I'm going to share my screen. So if you could please confirm that you can see everything right.
Indeed, we can, Mireia.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So thank you for those great introductions. So today we're going to be discussing some of the insights that we gained from our exploration of AI for healthcare in Europe. And we've actually just released the collection of chapters, case studies, and the executive report on our website that you can access here. And as you can imagine, it's basically going to be impossible to discuss in detail all of the phenomenal work that the researchers have done. So today, my plan is to focus on a very high-level discussion, but I encourage all of you to go to the website indicated here and to download all of the material, because I think it's really a very interesting read. Our goal was very ambitious, and it could not have been done without an extraordinary team, and Oscar already mentioned it, but I just wanted to highlight how wonderful the collaborations have been. It's been international, it's been cross-disciplinary, and everyone from our research coordinator, Marcos, whom you will meet in just a few minutes, Oscar and Carlos and Lourdes, of course, but also our advisory team, and very importantly, our team of researchers have been completely instrumental to make this happen. All of the work that I'm going to show you here today is coming directly from the case studies and the chapters that the researchers have done. So all the credit goes to them. So our goal was to understand AI for healthcare pathways. And what we mean by that is that we wanted to understand the main challenges and opportunities for going from the technical innovation to sustainable patient benefit. And this is a very complex translational process that requires much more than simple technical developments. It really builds on the whole innovation landscape, particularly data, and relies on the preparation of the workforce, on sustainable integration and implementation plans, and ultimately also the perception of the public and the professionals. And so this is what we set out to explore, and we think that these different steps are some of the crucial ones that need to be taken into account, and so they also constitute the main pillars of our work. We first set our foundation on what we mean by artificial intelligence, of course. This was done in the chapter that was led by Marcos Gallego, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that although we use the general term AI, we're really referring to machine learning techniques and the more sophisticated variants such as deep learning, which are basically algorithms that are able to learn from experience from previous data to make predictions by themselves. And there are two main areas in which AI is being used within medicine. We've heard about one just a couple of minutes ago, drug discovery, and the other one is patient care. And we've mostly focused on patient care in this work, from diagnostics to predicting the best treatment and to telemedicine applications. But actually, from a technical point of view, any machine learning algorithm has to satisfy a series of very clear criteria that we have set out in the report. To summarize, we basically need to check if the model is biased. In other words, if it has been trained properly with representative data and validated externally, and that it's satisfied any a priori specifications that we might have set, for example, at fairness for the algorithm. But we also need to check if the model is robust, for example, to small variations in the input data, and that it is explainable and transparent. And this really is general for any model. What's important about healthcare is that we also need to care about its clinical utility. And so this has been explored in detail in the case studies. And I just wanted to give you here an example of the study done by Sirkovic and Halai on AI in the fertility clinic. And so what they've done has been to look at a series of companies with AI products that can help select embryos in the fertility clinic. And what they found is that most tools have been shown to predict live births, but there's actually insufficient data to prove that they actually improve live birth rates. So this basically implies that there's a need for medical level validation of these tools. In other words, randomized clinical trials. And other studies that we've included in the report have also looked into the question of clinical validation. And generally, what we find is that rigorous clinical studies for AI tools are often lacking. So this is a very important dimension to add on top of all of the usual technical requirements for AI. Now, how these innovations are distributed across Europe is another very interesting question with very important consequences for the sector. And Jeffrey and Machado mined the database of the European Patent Office and looked at the trends for all of the digital health patents in detail across Europe. The first important finding is that the landscape is actually heterogeneous. And in particular, we find that there are 4 countries that dominate: Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, and France, with Sweden following very closely behind. And also, interestingly, that the Netherlands has over 60% of the digital health patents focusing on AI technologies. Everywhere else, it's more or less even between AI and big data, but the Netherlands seems to be leading in terms of the AI applications. And very interestingly also, when they look at the specific information technology categories that patents were filed in, they find that the 2 most dominant are large capacity information analysis and cognition and meaning understanding. And this is very interesting because it means that most of the innovation that has been happening in tools for handling big data has been precisely on this large capacity and also on explainability. And this shows that European innovators are very aware of the key challenges for AI that we discussed at the beginning. In other words, data and explainability. And we have indeed studied data in more detail in the study led by Filippo Pesapane, in which he finds that actually data sharing, curation, standardization, anonymization, etc., remain some of the biggest hurdles for the development of health AI applications in Europe. He also sees that new initiatives and regulations are moving in the right direction, but they need to be able to adapt quickly, and crucially, they have to involve cross-disciplinary efforts. And this is one of the key messages of this study, and I just wanted to highlight 2 particularly important areas where these efforts will be absolutely fundamental. The first one is the need for local calibration data to prevent biases. In other words, to make sure that the models that are being used are actually relevant for the specific characteristics of the local population. And achieving this relies on 2 very important components: clear guidelines for model reporting, and also an infrastructure for sharing data and standards. And in both areas, we find that Europe has a solid foundation to build on, but there's of course more work needed. The second very important area is the need to re-examine patient privacy and informed consent, as AI is moving towards precisely personalized medicine, which relies on obtaining detailed information about each patient. And again, the foundation is good. In this case, we have the European Privacy Regulation, GDPR, but it needs to be able to answer tricky questions that will come up more and more, such as, for example, how will informed consent work for continuous learning? That's a scenario in which the data was initially used for validation, but then it is used to retrain and improve a model in a continuous way. And of course, if data and algorithms are the main tools, the main users are, of course, the healthcare practitioners. And so Saif Ahmad and Brent O'Carrigan, both of them doctors, have led a study on the preparation of the healthcare workforce for AI. And what they have found is that a proactive approach to address the education and training of the healthcare workforce is going to be fundamental to realize the potential of AI. And crucially, this strategy must take into account the changing nature of the tasks that will be involved. Importantly, also the attractiveness of the career path and the constant evolution of AI in itself. And this is of particular relevance given the staff shortages throughout the geography. And we wanted to highlight these results for the UK, although we have more data on other countries in the report. There are 100,000 vacant posts in the British National Health Service this year. And that number is actually predicted to grow to something like 250,000 in the year 2030. And so this means that AI is very likely to have to play an important role to be able to effectively manage healthcare services. But this actually emphasizes even more the importance of adequate training for the workforce. And there's a series of tasks and action items to be done. I just wanted to highlight from all of the proposed solutions in the report that actually it's not just the healthcare workforce that needs to be trained. We also need to be thinking about the regulatory bodies, for example, that also need to be trained in AI. For data scientists, another big issue is that there's a prediction that there will be thousands of data scientists needed in coming years, and they have very attractive career paths in other areas of industry. So it's very important to develop attractive pathways for AI and data experts so that they stay in the healthcare arena. And ultimately, of course, creating joint degrees across health, engineering, and computing from the undergraduate level, such that we can go towards that vision of a truly interdisciplinary field. Beyond the workforce, how these tools are actually integrated in the healthcare pathways is also non-trivial. And in the work led by Amanda Sissons, she shows that it is important to proceed in a controlled way with continuous monitoring and adjustment. And in addition, she finds that funding schemes might need to be reevaluated to ensure that everyone is getting high quality care, particularly the most vulnerable. And this is a very high level conclusion, but she actually focused in the case of virtual primary care, telemedicine, which of course is not necessarily powered by AI, but there are actually some interesting insights that can be learned and extrapolated from it. And of course, telemedicine now, well, it's been growing for quite a while due to the multiple advantages that it presents, but with COVID-19, it has absolutely boomed. This is just a graph that shows you Google searches for telemedicine as a function of time, and you can very clearly see that spike in the months of March and April. And it's also interesting that it's now gone down, but you can see clearly that we're not going back to what we were, so telemedicine is most likely here to stay. And so what Sissons has shown in the study is that virtual primary care services, as we know them, often serve specific populations. In this particular case that she looked at, GP at hand, what she finds, as you can see in this pie chart, is that most of the users are young and therefore, in principle, less likely to present very complex complications. And the challenge here is the resulting fragmentation of the patient population that can potentially happen, which can have a series of important consequences, both for the sustainability of the system, for example, if GPs end up with very complex patient lists, and also for ensuring that everyone receives the same high quality of care. And it doesn't mean that it's impossible, it's just that it's something that we need to be thinking about. And so this points at the need to have a unified system that takes into account and includes both virtual and in-person services. And then finally, last but not least, how these technologies are perceived by the public and by the professionals themselves will ultimately determine whether and how they are used. And so Christopher Goldsworthy has reviewed all of the evidence and found that there's actually surprisingly little data on how the general public and professional communities perceive the potential benefits and drawbacks of healthcare AI, although this is now starting to grow. But what he's found is that all of the available studies provide a strong and consistent message that AI innovations should be fully integrated within healthcare systems and should complement healthcare professionals instead of replacing them. And this is the first very important finding. And the second one is that there is a clear polarization between the perception of different healthcare providers with doctors and hospitals with very clearly favorable perceptions and tech companies and drug manufacturers at the other end of the spectrum. And so this insight and the previous one highlights the important need to include patients in the discussions and in the design process of these technologies to truly understand and address their concerns and to make sure that the technological AI innovation that is being developed contributes to creating a system that is going to be more inclusive, more efficient, and overall better for patients. And so what needs to happen for all of this? Well, we think that there are 4 major pillars that require work: data, skills, perception, and integration. And all of them have clear actions that need to be taken to maximize the impact of AI. And we've been highlighting those throughout the presentation. We have them here in a table in the report in a lot more detail. Crucially, the majority of these challenges rely on global collaborations and partnerships. And there have been clear advances in this direction in all areas, but to make real progress, there needs to be a concerted and a very dynamic European effort to really make sure that we go from innovation to sustainable patient benefit, ultimately transforming the pathways of care. So I'm going to stop here, and I hope that this served as an introduction to the report and to the topic, and also as an introduction to the panel discussion that we are going to have next. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Marcos Gallego, who is the research coordinator for this program. He's a geneticist by training and an expert in technological innovation, and he's going to introduce the panelists and also to moderate the debate. So thank you for listening, and I'll pass it on to Marcos.
Great. Thank you very much, Mireia, for your really fantastic keynote. I think we all learned a lot about the outcomes of the project and how actually we can take these forward. Thanks as well to Oscar and to Carlos from the CGC, as well as to obviously Lilly for their support, and obviously the researchers for throughout the program for the last couple of years, the speakers, and obviously as well all of our attendees today. So I basically wanted to introduce the panelists for the roundtable. So first we have Vanessa Candeias. She's a healthcare expert as well as former head of global health and healthcare for at the World Economic Forum. We have Max Parmentier, who is the CEO of Birdie, which is a social care startup actually dealing with AI and digital technologies in social care. And finally, Filippo Pesapane, who is a radiologist at the European Oncologia Institute in Italy. So if you can turn on your videos, we can start seeing you, and then we will start having the discussion as we go. Before actually making the first questions, I want to just give you a few pointers to everybody in the public, to all attendees. Please actually use the Q&A tab, the question and answers tab, for asking questions throughout the roundtable. We would like everybody to ask questions as we proceed, and actually people will have the chance to vote for their favorite questions, so that actually the ones with the highest amount of votes will then be selected. We think that's actually a really interesting model to go forward. And as well, as we progress through the roundtable, we have basically 3 different sections, one on data, one on skills and regulation, and one on integration. we will be displaying a little poll for each of the sections, and we would like every attendee to actually answer the poll, and we will actually as well release the results of the polls as we proceed through the roundtable, which I think would be pretty interesting for the debate, as well as for really understanding what is the level of perception, what is the level of curiosity, and what are the ideas among the public. So once that has been said, basically, we want to make it a fast dialogue with answers of around 2 to 3 minutes. We want to be able to cover all areas. We understand this is a very complex project, the one that we are presenting. Mireia has talked about 6 different sections and 6 different papers and 4 case studies. So we want to really be able to be on point, to be very, very specific, but as well, obviously, keep it lively. So the first section, we wanted to be about data. So obviously, Mireia has been answering about how we have seen that data standardization, also avoiding biases in health data capture will be key, and also current methodologies for anonymization and de-identification are still suboptimal. So I think my first question is actually for Filippo Pesapane from the European Oncology Institute. So we all obviously understand the importance of data quality and biased data for algorithm training. But I think the kind of the next question is, how is this being achieved in the real world? And if data sharing and anonymization frameworks are still being developed, then is this a hurdle to keep training models as we go on representative data?
Yes, thank you, Marcos, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, this is a real topical problem. We know that systems based on artificial intelligence require large training data set. But we are lucky because healthcare has a huge level of data and it can benefit from such technology. However, some problems remain, namely variable competitiveness, quality of data entry, and interoperability between different providers. Most health-related datasets are actually unstructured and not yet standardized. The lack of curated large datasets is one of the key obstacles to the introduction of the AI system in healthcare. Without efforts to optimize interoperability, the practical effectiveness of AI in healthcare, in medicine, for example, in my job, will be severely limited. A set of standards are necessary to allow for integration between these different algorithms, for example. First of all, we should improve reproducibility and reporting. Indeed, one of the current limitations of AI system is the lack of standardized data and protocols, probably due to the rapid growth of the same AI tools. Shared guidelines could improve the quality of such database and make them useful for training AI algorithms. And it is timely that existing standards for prediction model reporting are being updated specifically to incorporate standards applicable for this purpose. In the current AI era, with the technology progress in big data and data sharing, it becomes possible to develop, validate, and update those predictive models using huge numbers of records collected either from electronic health records or assessing the individual cases in publishing models. But other issue we must solve, one of those is the standardization. With the complexity of healthcare data and the massive volumes of patient information, data standardization should occur at the initial development stage and not at the user end. So the first step to reach a consistent and standardized practice is to standardize the technique themselves. For instance, in my job in radiology, for example, the size of a mass in organs can be compared best if the same imaging acquisition protocol is used. Also, segmentation in the imaging data is even more challenging because an appropriate segmentation of an index lesion in the training process of an AI system requires the most uniform imaging possible, and currently there are no widespread standards to store and communicate segmentation results between different tools from different vendors.
Yeah.
Last,
perfect. I think last point here, go on.
Yes, last thing. Very important, we need to reduce variations in terminology in medical reports. A common and international imaging lexicon, for instance, for structured reports can provide a uniform method to share the information, which is important for an improved communication between different centers. Okay, stop.
Perfect. No worries. This is really interesting. And actually, I want to take one of your points, which is in this case, actually the one that you mentioned of interoperability and lack of standardized data, which I think it is, as you mentioned, very important given the fast development of technologies and given the fast development as well of data gathering, well, diagnostic tools, etc. So I guess I want to now ask Max Parmentier, the CEO of Birdie. Okay, so how is actually Birdie taking into account the fact that you know, there are interoperability problems, that data is still not standardized in every different tool, and how is basically Birdie taking this problem to make sure that it doesn't add extra noise in an already very cluttered world for care? And then obviously then the next question as well to Max is in regards to anonymization and trust. How can we exploit these data for the good? Max, that would be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Very delighted to be speaking today. I think on the first question, it's a huge issue, and we at Birdie we aggregating data from different data sets, from digital tools, and loads of information collected from care workers and different clinical practitioners, from IoT, and we trying to aggregate all this data to give it structure, to harmonize it in a data lake so that actually we can make sense of it and use AI tools on it. The first step of capturing that data in a structured fashion, aggregating that data, and actually being interoperable with other systems is a huge endeavor. There's a couple of topics in here. The first one is that historically, I think it was mentioned before by Filippo, the data has never been structured. So you have a lot of health data available, which has been actually collected, and systems have been built over time. And so you need to reverse back to these systems and actually give them more structure. And we see a few attempts, typically in the UK. The NHS is really pushing forward with standards and interoperability principles to make sure that these systems adhere to certain types of ontology. So ways to structure the data so that the data can speak to each other. The issue is that you need to go back to decades of data and actually give them some more structure. And you're talking about obviously terabytes of data sets here. So that's really one issue. The second issue is also that there's no winner-takes-all approach here. It's really you have a multitude of different systems which need to speak to each other. And so you need to find a common denominator for all these systems to speak together without prescribing too much interoperability, because otherwise it's impossible for these systems to innovate. And that's extremely tricky for a regulator or any kind of national body which is pushing for interoperability. And the third thing I think is that, I think Filippo talked about the quality of the data. We will move more and more towards all sorts of data, not only data collected from a doctor, but also from IoT for people who will self-declare the data when they fill out forms on apps about self-health and so on. And so that data will be much more biased indeed than before. It will be less, I'd say, objectified by a clinician. And so it will require much more cleaning to actually make that data accurate and helpful for the data set that you're building. On anonymization, it's a huge topic that we have. I think it relates to one of the other topics mentioned earlier, which is consent. I'm a firm believer that it's going to be extremely hard to claim that a data set is fully anonymized once you actually aggregate this data at a high level, typically when you have data sets or interoperable systems speaking together. It will be always possible to re-identify an individual based on their data. And so I think it's much more a question of consent and governance around any kind of platform that aggregates data from an individual to actually use their data with their consent. And then, of course, in the world of AI, it's extremely complex, because then how do you inform these individuals so that they can actually provide consent to a much more refined processing of their data, to the extent that it helps machine learning forward? And so that's a huge complex topic. But anonymization, for me, is just really a subset question of the real question, which is consent.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. And I think our research actually points to that, the fact that anonymization right now is very difficult, and you can actually still gather identities very easily. So it has to do actually with consent. And actually it links very well with the question to Vanessa. So, well, first of all, the poll has been closed. Thank you, Mireia, for launching it and sharing the results with everybody. We actually see that people think that patients should be in control of their own data through a unified platform, and also with the same level of votes, anonymized medical data should be distributed, traded, and used widely for all purposes. Then some other options have less amount of votes. A third one is data sharing should not be monetizable. So that, and also linking with the fact that all sources of data will be actually potentially used for medical and health and social care. Then actually my question for Vanessa is, right, so we have data sharing, we have patient-enabled models, potentially that might enable individuals to trade or to claim ownership of their data and then share it with potential companies or potential users. And obviously data will be coming from different sources, from hospitals, from wearables, from self-introduced patient data. So then, Vanessa, I think you, as representing, obviously, having been in international organizations for a long time in the health world, then actually, what do you think? Which patient-enabled models do you think will actually triumph, that will allow patients to actually claim this ownership and really exercise this choice over their own data? Do you think this will be possible? And if so, which models do you think will actually arise that will enable people to do this?
Right. Thank you, Marcus. And thank you, Mireia and Oscar, for the invitation. And easy question that you're throwing my way. So let me try and mention two parts that I think are important. The first one that links back to the challenges that have been discussed up until now, and Max touched very well in the study itself, is highlighting the challenges of interoperability in a very clear manner. Where I see a sort of a solution can hopefully come from more work on federated databases. This means that, each healthcare provider, each country, each researcher will be able to keep their own database, and researchers can collaborate on how these databases are queried without having to share data, which would then be slightly easier to address some of the questions around consent or around the data sharing across borders, which in Europe, hopefully we're walking towards an easier way, but that's not the case, and we want to be able to collaborate with other countries outside Europe as well. So to me, federated databases, and the more progress we can have, and the more we can use data standardization, as well as the advanced consent from the patients to actually build a backbone of informatics to be able to use databases in this manner, I think it will probably help in terms of advancing. So that's one. And then going back to the patient empowerment, we can't forget that ultimately, all of the tools that we're using, be it from AI, be it from big data, and the report mentions this, they should be used to the benefit of the patient, right? And so what we should all be aiming for, and what we're seeing in many of the examples that the report highlights, is you're putting the patient at the center, you're designing systems that need to be human-centric. And so therefore, we are looking for outcomes, health outcomes, that will matter to the patients, that the patients themselves report as being the ones that matter to them. And so if we have that at the center of how we think of the reshaping of the systems and how we think about the use of technology, then it starts to become a bit clearer. How do we establish the care pathways in a way that are benefiting the patient without bankrupting the system? We can't ignore that, especially in the face of COVID, where everyone's budget's going to be squeezed. And so putting the patient at the center and then thinking about how the patients look at their own data. So the first thing is, me as a patient, I need to access and understand my own data. And that means that I need to have a record that I understand, which then also means it needs to be standardized so that if I have a value there that I don't understand, I can Google it and I can make heads of or tails of what this is. And it needs to be more or less the same so that if I go to different providers and they measure my blood pressure using different metrics, I still understand it more or less. So that's one. I need to access my own data and I need to understand it. The second one is my ability to share it with different medical doctors, with different providers, but also, and we can't forget, this is very important, I think, in the European context, where we have a very large population, part of the population aging, that will face many of the, not just the chronic diseases like cardiovascular, diabetes, cancer, chronic respiratory disease, but also mental health, dementia, and all of that. Me as a patient, I need to be able to share my data with a family member. And a family member need to then also be able to say, okay, well, it's time to call your GP, or it's time to call your hospital provider, or it's time to ring an alarm and send an emergency service here. So it's very important that we're able to share it across providers, but also share it with a family member that can then help make some of these decisions. And then the third aspect, which I think it's very important, is about providing feedback. Me as a patient, providing feedback to my healthcare provider, to my doctor, to the nurse. Maybe I did not get the outcomes that I hoped for. And if enough of us as patients are providing the feedback, then it's easier for the healthcare provider to flag there's something here that is not going well. All the knee surgeries or all the knee operations that we've done, 10% are saying that the patients are not happy with the outcome. So the ability to have this feedback loop, it's very important. And again, it's linked to the ability of the patient understanding its own condition, understanding its own data, and being able to operate the different technologies. So I think the challenges of interoperability of data cannot be underestimated. The challenges of privacy, of security of the data, and then the trust of the patient in using that data, consenting to that data being used for different purposes, none of those can be underestimated. And we can never forget that everything that we're designed should be for the benefit of the patient, not only for the economic efficiency of a system that, of course, we all want it to be sustainable, but at the end, if we're very conscious about gatekeeping on the outcomes that matter to the patients, we're able to organize technology and organize AI solutions, organize big data solutions towards what matters to the patients, therefore hopefully increasing the efficiency in the system.
Yeah. That's really important, and I really like what you say of human-centered as well, obviously population-centered, really creating this unbiased data, and at the end of the day, actually this sharing and this sharing data with who you want to share data with, and providing feedback that creates actually new data that feeds back into the whole concept of human-centeredness of healthcare, which obviously I think is very key, and I think also both Max and Filippo have also been mentioning it. So perfect, really nice. Let's move on to the second section, which will be basically on skills and regulation. We want to make it even faster, just basically a few sentences from each of those. I really want to hear what you guys think about basically doctor's training and about our continuous learning of digital skills while on the job, especially as digital skills and digital needs are actually increasing as fast as they are. Before I make the question, I would like to remind people to keep asking questions and keep voting for the questions on the Q&A tab. Now, let's actually right now start with Max. My question for you in terms of skills is, obviously as CEO of Birdie, what has been your experience with actually interacting with care practitioners? And have you found that there is a need for skills training, or is there any other barriers for usage apart from doctoral or practitioner digital skills, or even patient digital skills? Could you summarize in just a few sentences your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I think there are really two elements here that I want to mention. The first one is that one should be very careful not to be too arrogant with the level of skills, and particularly digital skills in the medical world. And so we can boil the ocean in terms of, complexity of new technologies, but we should start with the basics. And we see that every day in our startup, where it's about providing digital products which are extremely user-friendly to digitize operations, because there are millions of clinicians still using paperwork today. And so that's one. Then obviously you need much more qualified professionals who can actually handle data and health together. And I think that the point made during the presentation was brilliant on that end, because it's really a widening gap today. We operate essentially in home care and social care. And so we operate with care workers, and we're talking about people here who are paid at the minimum wage and are basically taking care of the elderly at home for the vast majority. What we're trying to do with technology is to make these people the eyes and the ears of the clinicians on the ground. And I think you have a shift of skill sets that way, thanks to technology, where in the end, you preserve the time of the highly skilled clinicians, and you use technology to actually use a workforce qualified technology to actually perform the medical and clinical acts that are necessary. And that's really powerful, I think, through technology. But I'll stop there.
Perfect, really nice. So then let's actually ask Filippo, who I really agree with you, Max, and actually we need to be really careful with this arrogance of thinking, right, because digital skills are changing a lot, and obviously becoming more and more complex. Then doctors might need this and that, which obviously we really need to get away from that, even though skills really is a topic of conferences, like medical skills conferences, digital skills. So Filippo, I think my question to you is, how do you actually see the concept of continuous learning while on the job, especially as a radiologist? So how real is the issue with potentially, if algorithms might do more and more of the easier tasks, then how important is the issue of junior doctors not actually getting trained on those easier cases, and then when they come to the more complex cases, then obviously not having the personal background, the personal skills to really maybe potentially assess them with the same quality of analysis than senior doctors in the old times. Do you think this is a problem? And if so, how is this being potentially solved? How could this be solved?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Actually, in my opinion, the key point will be the separation of diagnosis or prediction from action and recommendation. Physicians, radiologists, humans in general will not be replaced by machines, by those algorithmic tools. Our practice is much more than, for example, my job is much more than simple interpretation of images. And trust me, this feeling is not based on any prejudicial defense of my job as a discipline and professions. I mean, the radiologist and the human in general also, our duties also include communication, for example, of diagnosis, consideration of patient's value, preference, medical judgment, quality assurance, education, policy making, many other tasks that so far cannot be performed by computer programs alone. We should keep in our mind that human control in the loop, considering clinical, personal, and social context in ways that AI alone is not able to do. So far, AI is neither astute nor empathic. Physicians remain essential for medical practice, for example, because ingenuity in medicine requires unique human characteristics. On the other hand, if the for example, in my job, if the time needed for image interpretation was short, and radiologists would be able to focus on inference to improve patient care. If AI is based on huge increase information, the hallmark of intelligence is reducing the information of what is relevant. It is impossible, of course, to exclude that the efficiency gain provided by AI may lead to a need for fewer radiologists, for example. However, this gain in efficiency will allow radiologists to perform more value-added tasks, such as integrating patients' clinical imaging information or having more professional interaction, becoming more visible to patients and playing a vital role in integrated in clinical teams. In this way, AI will not be a problem even for our job. Yet those radiologists who take advantage of the potential of AI will replace the ones who refuse this crucial challenge, in my opinion. This, of course. And finally, I like to remember that AI mimics human intelligence. Radiologists are capable for several current AI challenges, such as the creation of a high-quality training dataset, definition of the clinical task to address, and the interpretation of obtained results, as other panelists suggested before.
Yeah. Indeed, many thanks, Filippo, for this. I think this is extremely key. Decoupling diagnosis from making recommendations from doctoral skills training. Right now, doctors are trained by diagnostics and by recommendations. If that is decoupled, then obviously one thing can potentially be helped by AI, while doctors are trained actually on potentially other kind of diagnostics, more for training, etc. And as well, obviously, the role of radiologists actively helping to solve digital problems is very key. The second poll has been closed. What is the best way to make a career in the digital health more attractive? People have voted that creating combined positions between industry, academia, and medical systems might be one of the best answers. Also, creating digital modules in medical degrees to equip doctors with deep digital expertise, and as well, obviously, higher salaries and benefits matching those offered by global tech companies, which indeed I think it is very key as well. So I just want to move now to the third part, and I want to start with Vanessa on the third basically final module of our roundtable on integration. So we have seen actually how virtual providers of care are solving many problems, are helping to basically take out the bulk of patients, maybe from hospitals, especially from from more trivial diseases or from more trivial conditions, but are introducing new imbalances into the system. So to Vanessa, then my question is obviously, a consequence of fragmentation, as Mireia was mentioning, is that it would actually make current funding models potentially unsustainable. So what is the wider picture in regards to creating a sustainable model for a digital enabled healthcare that really ensures that everybody receives a high quality care while really using, in this case, telemedicine, wearables, and data to our benefit without creating these side problems that we now see that might be actually appearing?
Thank you, Marco. And that's a very good question. So let's think, if we know that by 2050, we're going to get nearly 10 billion people in the planet, and us as a community of health and tech professionals are looking into solutions of how to provide 10 billion people with access to the care that they need when they need it. It really comes down to thinking about the continuum of care and not just about the segment where people are sick and in need of care. So we need to think about integration, starting in prevention, screening, diagnosis, treatment, and then obviously maintaining of therapies and maintaining the health of people, even if they're living with multiple chronic conditions. So that's the first aspect. think about the continuum of care. The second aspect is really, we need to be thinking that 70 to 80% of all of our healthcare needs can be matched through primary care systems. That means our community health center. That means the contact with our physician that, you know, no machine should ever replace, because we all know that the patient and doctor and nurse relationship is very strong in the process of cure. So that one, in terms of linking, bringing the primary care to the center of how we look at the healthcare system and its sustainability. For Europe, this is even more important, because we do have an aging population that has a very large incidence of chronic diseases. Therefore, if we are looking at long-term care, hopefully at home, hopefully integrated with the community, then that means, and if we have a good enlarged definition of primary care, that means that we will easily bring into what we see as the healthcare system players that are providing care at home, players, stakeholders that are looking at what food our communities getting access to, players that are looking at, you know, where are these communities living and how can we, you know, increase social connectivity, decrease isolation, increase physical activity, all of that. So you look at it from a primary care perspective, and that brings allows for a more comprehensive response. And then the third aspect that I think it's very important is looking at collaborations between public sector and private sector, so business and government and civil society. So all three, they need to, in healthcare, they need to always be looking at how to collaborate in a meaningful way. And then the last part, which is really around going across sectors. So we see here some of us are from healthcare practitioners, IT, etc., but we need much more. And so to me, the sustainability of the healthcare system will come from all of us being more comfortable in collaborating across sectors and in collaborating between public and private, and navigating the different cultural differences that come from working in a business versus being a regulator or a policymaker. And the more comfortable we are as healthcare professionals, then the better we're able to reshape the system to respond to the patient's needs.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. This is great, Vanessa. I think I take from you obviously the part of integration, really starting in prevention, screening, diagnosis, and treatment. I take actually as well the importance of primary care at home, the importance that actually players that actually could potentially be providing home-based care, potentially looking at, as you say, food for communities, sports advice, obviously wearables data from prevention, from really lifestyle and you know, improving health as a pre-patient or as a, you know, new kind of if we want to extend the definition of patient to a healthy individual. Great. Just to announce, we are happy to extend over a few minutes because people, I think, they are interested, they are asking questions. So we are happy to extend to a final 5 or 10 final minutes. If anybody wants to ask any final questions on Q&A and/or vote, they are very welcome to do so. Just want to announce the results of the final poll as well. Has there been a change in your perception of telemedicine in the last few months? Kind of a tie between I'm now more likely to use telemedicine and I am equally likely to use telemedicine. Only 3 voters have actually chosen I'm less likely to use telemedicine after what has occurred in the last few months. So I think there's indeed a change in perception, and basically telemedicine tools, home care tools, obviously trying to not clog hospitals might become, or you know, as one of the outcomes of this is actually, you know, in the minds of many people. I think we want to now actually move to the questions and really just make a nice final rounds of questions between both Filippo, Max, and Vanessa. I will thank everybody for your answers to this round table. I think it has been great. We have learned a fair deal of new information, and I think everybody is now thinking about the future of healthcare in the terms that we have been thinking about in the last 1.5 years or 2 years, and how now the COVID-19 crisis has really showcased how important this is. So let's actually go to the questions. The first question that has received actually 12 votes from Bartomeu Montserrat is the following. Let's actually start with Max to answer this question. Should data standardization be a government-led or a private or private sector-led effort, or both? Should governments or should actually private companies be leading the data standardization and really data structuring efforts in the near future? What do you think, Max? Start with you.
I think it's a brilliant question. It's a question that I've asked myself and that we ask ourselves as an industry a lot. And even when you talk, I mean, we're based in the UK, and we talk to policymakers in the UK, the answer is, it should come from the industry, it should come from the private sector to define your own standards, which will be then widely adopted, as you've seen in the past, typically the 3W and the others. Sorry, W3 and the others. I think in healthcare, it's different. I think in healthcare, it has to be mandated by a body for many different reasons, but first, because the trial and error is not acceptable in healthcare, right? You can't actually fail. You need to make sure that, and you need to ensure consistency and quality of the standards day one. Second, because as I said, it's not a winner takes all model. It has to be regulated. And you have so many systems talking to each other that everybody's asking for a central body to actually move forward. And the third reason is because it's such a fragmented public-private market. And so there's always a public body involved one way or another, whether that provides the care or that regulates the care or that supervises the care or that pays for the care, that you will need a national body eventually to actually step in and define standards. And I think so for that reason in healthcare, I'm in favor of standards being defined by some sort of national body, which is government regulated. And I think you see some examples across the world where that works very well. And actually that accelerates innovation instead of stalling innovation.
Can I just add, Marcus, one thing there is that in Europe, we need to remember that governments are in fact one of the largest payers, and therefore they should be able to be analyzing the data that is being going through this system in order to be making evidence-informed decisions. And so ideally, it doesn't mean that governments have to be the ones setting this up, but I think having any sort of standardization being set up that does not involve the government, which in Europe is one of the largest payers, would not be for the benefit of the sustainability of the system.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Vanessa, for your point. I think this is indeed really key, that to really involve governments because of their interest as well, as you say, in really making strategy-informed decisions as data gets generated. I want to basically now kind of mix the final, the second and third questions, and then just throw them to Filippo and then Max as well, and then you, Vanessa. Basically, well, first of all, we have the fact that medical device and pharma companies are moving to really produce these value-added solutions, so AI-enabled, digital-enabled, patient pathway optimization, etc. Beyond obviously this like product or drug transaction, right? These slightly more service like drugs plus, if you want to say, approach. So first of all, do you think the public healthcare is actually willing to take this step to potentially become linked to a slightly more service-based provision from pharma companies, leading to slightly more maybe tied relationships between public or between sufferers of given conditions and a pharma company, be it through a device, be it through being technologically locked, through some kind of data standardization, model, etc., which happens in the tech world. So it could as well happen in the medical world. And then as well, maybe also for Filippo, how can we really avoid biases in data that already exist in society? Data is representative, but obviously is intrinsically unjust, maybe because of potential, hospital access by different groups, different populations, different social levels. So how can we really make sure that data is not representing this unjust current setting in society? So let's start with Filippo. Maybe Filippo, you can answer the one on data being potentially intrinsically unjust and data biases, as you are already in the field. And then Max and Vanessa, maybe you can think a bit more on the slightly more economic aspects of a technological lock-in by pharma companies in the way of service provision. Filippo, can you unmute yourself, please? We don't hear you. Can you press unmute? There you go.
Sorry. Yes, as you said, bias is a real problem for developing the AI system. Very briefly, a certain amount of bias is something that we will accept. The key point is to reduce it as much as possible. How to do it? Through standardization. The only way of standardization in radiology may become attainable, also increasing productivity, because AI still needs high quality data with a less amount of bias as possible. It needs high quality studies, but its application, the application of AI will lead towards better quality, and so increasing productivity as well.
Perfect, really good. Max or Vanessa, does anybody want to come in now for the digital services aspect of healthcare providers and pharma companies or medtech companies?
I can go. There's this whole body of work now, which is called value-based care, that is alluding precisely to that, right? How do we reorient the systems by putting the patient at the center and the outcomes that matter to the patient at a cost that is sustainable for the system? And based on that is a lot of pharma companies are actually changing their business model to be able to provide care under such systems, as well as some medical devices. And you see that those business models, where the government also sees the value of actually being reimbursing for outcomes and not per service or per pill or per x-ray, that actually makes it more sustainable. And so when in settings and in countries or for conditions in which you have the government willing, or the payer, the insurer, willing to reimburse based on an outcome, then you see the pharma companies, the medtech, the healthcare providers stepping up and saying, okay, this is the care pathway that we will go through with the patient in order to get to that outcome. And this is how it's a fair reimbursement of this entire care pathway. I believe that that will be the future of this for the sustainability of healthcare, but it does require a big lift in terms of standardization of data collection and standardization of the care pathways, because if it's not standardized, then it's very hard to reimburse. It does take a big lift in terms of collaboration between public and private, and it takes a big lift in terms of setting up the backbone of the informatics infrastructure of all the stakeholders involved in this. And above all, which should never be underestimated, it requires huge communication and collaboration across all the stakeholders with the patient then going through that care pathway. So I do see a lot of appetite from big and small pharma, medtech, healthcare providers. The thinking is there. The business strategies are being developed, putting that model of paying per outcome instead of paying per service or paying per device or paying per pill. And therefore, I think there will be a way to get there. But the road, the navigation is not completely, it's not so easy. If it was easy, it would have been done. So it requires a lot of collaboration, it requires a lot of cooperation across stakeholders, and that makes it quite complex. But I do think that that should be the way of the future.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa, for your final thoughts on this. I think it is spot on indeed. Max, any final words, or shall we move on to say goodbye? And thank you.
No, I think just to reiterate what Vanessa just said, that outcome-based funding, outcome-based healthcare is absolutely the future. We're working days and nights, Birdie, on that. How can you organize an entire system, health and social care included, towards the funding and the support of patients based on the outcome that the service delivery will generate? And it's a totally different approach, but a few countries are taking it, and pharma companies are embedding their services and products in that framework as well. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I think, thank you for both Vanessa and Max for this link to the outcome-based approach. I think indeed it will be very key for pharma, medtech, and drug developers alike in the next few years, as well as obviously startups. So perfect. Maybe I can now give the stage to Oscar for maybe saying the final words, thanking everybody. Thank you again, all of the panelists, for this really exciting discussion. And Oscar, the stage is yours.
No, thank you, Marcus. And there's not much more to do than thank the audience a lot for your active participation. We really appreciate that. And I also want to say that, this is not the end of a debate, but rather the start of it. And I think the panelists outlined all the problems and answers very, very well. So thank you all. Thank you, Lilly. And I've sent the link to the reports in the chat. So stay tuned, and looking forward to seeing you all again. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody. A pleasure.